This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and we are 4 episodes now into a wonderful discussion with Chahan. Chahan, we are talking about subjectivity and objectivity of coffee and good coffee in our industry. And we can't have a conversation with you without talking about coffee competitions and the objectivity and subjectivity of how they are rated and scored, and how, let's just take the idea of taste, for example. Taste is so subjective, and yet you'll have a lot of people say, no, but taste is objective if you know exactly how to taste and how not to taste. But, that one's always kind of broken my brain a little bit, because biochemistry and our mood and all of those things play such an important role in the way we're tasting things at the time. So there's a real disconnect between objective and subjective when it comes to good coffee, particularly when it comes to competition. Do you have any thoughts around this?
Yes. Okay. Very important, interesting, really, this discussion, in the sense that coffee at the base is not an objective thing. We drink coffee because we enjoy it. We love coffee, and it is, at the end, it is an interaction of a coffee with us in the mouth, with our brain, with all our senses. And we drink coffee because it does something to us. It is an experience. It is something we enjoy. So the experience, the whole coffee world exists because of the subjective experience that we have. So it is, at the base, it is a subjective experience. But of course, we share our subjective experience. Myself and my friends, we have perhaps common. So there's some kind of objective notion, but at the base, it is a subjective, it is my personal, and I don't have to explain why I like that coffee. So I'm not forced to explain to anybody why I like that coffee. And even if people try to force me, I just like it. And so at the base, it is a subjective experience. But then to reach this flavor profile, you have to know so much about the coffee. Because if then you get a coffee that you don't like, how do you actually do to transform a coffee such that it fits me, or it fits then, to make it easy for research, it must fit a segment. It must be like a group of people. Otherwise, you won't do real research for one person individually, But if you have like a huge segment of people who have like a similar experience, subjective experience, but like it still creates a segment, then you want to understand, once you know what they like, how to deliver this experiences. And that part is science. It's objective science. You have to understand and measure the link between every single step. The quality and the experience is only expressed in the cup, but the cup is just the final result of huge amount of transformation and processes. So you have, as a scientist, you have to understand the impact of, of a particle size distribution of a grind, and how the share of fines or the courses of the grind is affecting the final experience as a function of the extraction technique that you have been using, or the dose you use, or the brew ratio. There are so many factors that has an impact on the final experience. But you have, as a scientist, we have to understand every single property and process parameters and how they affect this final experience, which itself is a subjective experience. But anything that leads to there is actually an objective science. So what we do as a scientist, we look at the subjective experience, and we want to look at the segment is big enough to make science, that to be relevant, just to be economically relevant. But then we want to understand through scientific, which means a lot of data, repetition, statistically validated methods and data, how the different steps or the properties of the green coffee, or the storage condition of green coffee, the transport, the roasting, the grinding, the packaging, everything has an impact on that. And so we as scientists, we have objective methods and knowledge about how every single transformation steps affect the coffee to reach a specific cup that itself is subjective. But we understand how these processes and this transformation work.
Mm-hmm.
We master coffee to reach a subjective experience that we will not define. We will not define what the good coffee is. We will leave that to the consumer, but we understand how the grinding or the temperature of the water or the brew ratio or the roast profile, all that might and will affect that. And so that's what we're doing. And as a scientist, that's where objective. Otherwise, it's just like black box science. You do and do, and then you sometimes you end it. No, that's not what we want. And once we understand that, we might even then say, look, we can actually do the flavor a bit different. Do you like that as well? So we then have like a controlled approach to modulate, and then what I call to expand the sensory space of coffee. Because we understand it, we can do it in a controlled way. We can expand the sweetness, the acidity, the bitterness. And so why is bitterness coming? A lot of people can we understand and reduce the bitterness? And so we can then at some point, once we are able to replicate and to control the consumer, we can start to expand the world of coffee, the sensory space of coffee, and then eventually start to gain new consumer or to bring consumer to new experience which they like, so which we do now with fermentation. We're creating totally new coffees. Now, how does competition affect is what you also wanted to go to, I believe.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because we've got this industry that seems to be leaning more and more heavily on competition.
Yes,
as a way of innovation and highlighting different innovation, which I'm not sure is healthy for our industry because it is so subjective.
Yes. So what competition, I think, first of all, if you want to improve something, you have to measure it. You have to make it visible. So competition is needed. If you want to get people who run faster, you have to make Olympic Games. So the people start to train. So a competition is also a way for people to aim for more training, and so it has, I think a competition is always important for a discipline to improve. If you would not have athletic competitions, people would not run that fast today. People will not jump that far today. So the competition is for those who are very ambitious to find ways to go beyond what we can do today. And what we see today is in competition, you have to innovate in many aspects. You have to come with innovations in the way you talk about coffee, in the way you process coffee, you extract coffee, and at the end, what matters is always the experience in the cup. So in the competition, if you innovate something that has no impact in the cup, that will not be impactful the competition. So I think these are people who in the past had done a lot in a very black box manner. But today I'm working more and more with competitors to understand scientifically what's happening in the process and optimize that and bring that to the competition. So the extract chilling is a typical example that we did over the last 2 years in order to improve really the quality with the innovation. So I see more and more. Also, in the past, we have seen many people, Andre Eiermann, who innovated in roasting on stage. And he's not the only one. There are many people who have really now, in their routine, they integrate a lot of science. When they even talk about it, how research was done to university, and it helped them to develop specific notes. So the competitors today are becoming much more educated, much more open to science, and they go into science. So competition has become very science driven. And what I see it's now that often the competitors are often way superior to the people who judge them. And so we should also have at the judging level, this perhaps the judges are still one generation behind
Mm-hmm.
the level of the competitors, because the development is so fast and it happens with the competitors, whereas the judges are perhaps people who are already in a more mature phase in a development. And so the danger today is that the science and the innovation by some competitor is just going beyond the head of the judges. And so we also have to pay attention at the level of judging, because it becomes so fundamentally important to every competitors to be judged properly. But this is another subject. I know everybody is paying attention, but the competitors are integrate more and more science when it comes. A lot was done in the past on fermentation techniques,
Mm-hmm.
then on species and varieties, then also how to mix it with milk, the marriage between milk
Mm-hmm.
and coffee. Texture has become a very important, multimodal experience has become a very important aspect. And now also on extraction technologies. I think the competitor are getting more and more open to science. They actually realize you won't become a barista or a brewing champion if you don't are interested in the science going on. They have actually embraced science quite strongly.
It seems that, particularly in recent history, competitors are using science as a way to be more competitive. And
Yes.
sometimes I think that's a great thing. And sometimes I think that is a little bit damaging, if you don't mind me saying. It seems that there have been times when people are using science as a way to perhaps discredit other competitors, or discredit judges, or to discredit producers. And science gets brought in to be the alternative judge beyond the competition for something like that.
Okay.
Are you starting to see something? Are you
I
starting to see that
understand.
more
I
and
understand
more?
what you're saying. I see that. But what they should do if they bring science in to discredit people, they should ask the scientist. And that's
Well
then
said.
because so in a way I know that, but I think this is just a transitory phenomena. We are getting more and more asked. People realize that they should come to the scientists and talk to them when they make scientific judgments about things. And and yeah, we are in a phase where the championship and the competition is evolving at such a high speed with so much science coming in. There will be a phase of consolidation, of understanding how to work with that. So we are actually I would say, in an unstable phase of huge developments. And here the SCA, the Special Cover Association, is aware of that, and they are addressing this. Of course, we're coming out of a COVID phase of many challenges that have been on the SCA, so they cannot cope with everything. They are not the god of the specialty coffee movement, but they are still responsible for that. They have to take control of that, and I know that the people who are at the head of this organization, they can do that intellectually, and they have the capacity. So yeah, perhaps sometimes something happens that is not good, happens in every competition, but overall, I think the science is getting a bigger say in the performance. But at the end, it has to have an impact on the cup. You
And
cannot
the
do
industry.
scientific in the industry in a second phase. In the first phase, if you introduce Eugenoides, as a new species, you're not gonna affect the industry. So, and you realize that even at the championship level, that they want to do things that can be translated into something that could become impactful in the industry. So
Right.
you will see more and more innovations that can be translated, into something real. Whereas in some cases, they were kind of such a niche that it will not have an impact, at least in the very medium term.
Well, or it can't be applied on the industry level.
Yes.
There are such big problems that our industry are facing that taking something like the introduction of eugenioides is just like so far beyond the scope of what any small business owner cares about right now, when inflation is such a big thing, a labor shortage is such a big thing, climate change is impacting the availability of coffee, logistics, all of these kinds of things. And this is where I have a real problem with the disconnect between the real world industry and the endeavors that are happening at the competition level. There's such a huge disconnect between what we call a barista in everyday life versus baristas that are competing at that level, that are creating kinds of technologies that are almost irrelevant at the real world industry level.
Yes. Well, I don't want to judge on that. This is what we have in the science between basic science and applied science.
Right.
Basic science is needed.
Absolutely.
It is needed to do, and you need applied science. So now the question is whether the basic science of coffee has a place in the barista competition. I think both have a place. And we'll see, you can do things that are totally not applicable in the next 30 years. And it might have a place if really create something, because it's starting to make people think we're not able to do it, but shall we take care of that? Shall we start to research on that? And it's a long-term approach, how to integrate organoides in some way, or can we get that? So it has a place, but at the same time, the applied research or the applied part is getting more and more important.
Yeah.
So this will then depend on the judging, how the judges will evaluate different type of innovations. And I don't have really an opinion right on that.
That's fine.
Because it's just, it's two different approaches. And I think the discussion will have to come because the judges will decide because they are setting the conditions to become world barista champion.
Right.
So whatever they decide, they promote. They will promote what they want. So they have to decide what they want to promote.
And this is where that intersectionality of objectivity and subjectivity really gets a microscope put on it, because competition cannot be objective. It's not like we're all, you use the example of running in the Olympics.
Yes.
It's a very objective outcome. Who can run the fastest from start A to start B? Whoever gets there at the end, that's an incredibly objective perspective.
Yes.
It's different when we're talking about barista competitions and Brewers Cup competitions and all those kinds of things, right?
It is different, but in a way, we are setting objectives which the judge sets, and everybody tries to perform. These are the rules, there are rules. And so we are setting the framework, or we basically, the judge or SCA is judging the framework. And if you want to perform, you have to follow these rules, and then these criteria will be applied on you. So whatever we set as rules, the framework will be promoted. And so we have to think why we set which rules and what would you want to promote in the future in the specialty coffee. And that's a discussion which I didn't have really yet. I'm not involved in setting rules. I'm not at all involved in that. And I'm not even sure whether there are groups I'm sure there are people who are thinking about that.
Right. It's going to have to be on the agenda at some point. And perhaps having some scientists involved in that might be helpful towards the outcome of the way competition goes into the future. So we'll see. Now, in our final episode, we're going to be talking about where coffee research is headed into the future. So let's go on and have that conversation. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.